Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how I built my own mechanical keyboard. This is the TJSBear and let's begin. So as I said before, this video is about the construction of my keyboard. But first I want to go through all the components and then I will do a sound test at the end, so make sure you stick around until that bit. The first piece of this puzzle is the PCB, which is the main hub for the electrical and mechanical connections for the keyboard, which the rest of the pieces plug into. I went with the popular DZ60 PCB, which has many benefits over others including USB-C and an underglow RGB array. This is the aluminium plate that acts as a mount to keep all of the switches straight when being soldered to the PCB. It also looks pretty cool in between the keycaps. Mine came pre-bent, which was a nice touch, but I managed to mitigate some of it by bending it the other way. You can go without the plate, but you have to buy PCB mounted switches instead of normal ones. Speaking of which, these are the Gateron Brown plate mounted switches. They are a tactile switch that require 50 grams of weight to activate the switch. They have each been painstakingly disassembled, lubricated and reassembled to make the motion of the switch more smooth. I did this twice in all, as the first time I messed up the amount of silicone oil, and so each switch was slightly different, which I would have been unhappy about later on, so it was worth it to me. The stabilizers are next. These were a massive source of worry for this project, as the only reason they were chosen was because they were cheap. Less than a quarter of the usual price of around £20, it was probably a bad choice from the beginning. Usually stabilizers imitate the cherry variant, which is well known for being the best. But no, instead these bargain pieces ignore that design and use one that have a pre-clipped stem, while also being mushy. They make a scraping noise when they rub against each other, but I managed to lessen that slightly with some dielectric grease on the insides. Case is next. This one is a black ABS Poker 2 style case, which by far is not a magnificent option, but I think it looks pretty cool all the same. It came with some rubber feet and a few screws to attach the PCB with later on. It's keycap time, and for these I chose some side printed caps. They are a mix of light and dark grey, but it has a bright red escape key that contrasts nicely with the rest of the grayscale theme. The key lettering is laser etched, which is the cheapest option, but it has the major downside that it can wear off after a few months of use. However, since the side of the key usually doesn't get a lot of wear, I think this is a non-issue. Other methods of printing include dye sublimation, which involves dyeing specific areas of the cap with heat. And then there's the more expensive double shot keycaps, which have two different pieces of plastic, which means that the lettering will practically never wear out. These particular keycaps are made from a thick 1.5mm PVT plastic, which has a very durable textured finish. Now that's over, it's my favourite part, the build process. The first step is to install the stabilizers. These just stabilize the keycap when it pressed. Usually you just clip them into the board, but I wanted to improve the sound and feel of my keyboard further by doing what is called the Band-Aid mod, which is where you stick a little piece of fabric tape or plaster into the PCB, where the base of the stabilizers hit. This eliminates some of the sound, but not all of it. Then, after a light application of dielectric grease, I clip them in as usual. Now the next step involves attaching the plate to the PCB. To do this, I first placed in some switches in each of the corners, and then in the middle, to counteract some of that bending. Then I soldered each one in place. Make sure you solder these in the right place, as they're a pain to remove after soldering. Just as a side note, I did try not to get in my head in this shot, but after watching this later, I saw that I failed miserably. Then it's just a case of placing the rest of the switches in place, ready for soldering, using the keycaps for a reference point. This is where I hit my first problem. When I attached the plate, I incorrectly placed the right control switch, meaning that the whole bottom row was not going to fit. I spent a good 30 minutes prizing that switch out of the socket without a switch remover, and not using a solder sucker, as the one that I had a melted end. You live and you learn, eh? Next, I finished placing all of the switches. You can tell that I was tired by this point, as I hadn't noticed the sudden change in light, which is why this scene and the next looked so green. I'd like to point out at this point that this is not a tutorial. Basically, this is a do as I say, not as I do video, and this next bit set me back hours. After trying the left shift key, I noticed that only half the key was moving down. On closer inspection, I found that the metal stick inside the stabilizer had gotten stuck below the plastic of the stabilizer, preventing that side from compressing. My initial thought was to remove it, but that would mean I would have to unsolder all of those strategically placed switches, something I never wanted to do again. However, I managed to fix it by praising the metal bar away from the plastic with a pair of scissors and twisting the plastic into the right location. After around half an hour of doing that, the shift key behaved normally finally. Finally, it was time to solder. This went unexpectedly right. I had no issues whatsoever, and it took less than 20 minutes. I burnt the edges of my fingers once or twice, and I shot in portrait mode, which is why the picture is smaller. But that's about it. Now, if you're attempting this home, I urge you not to use leaded solder, as a slightly simpler attempt is not a good enough reason to damage yourself and the environment. Now the health lecture is over, I'm going to start a time lapse where I solder the switches. Enjoy. Next, it was time to put it inside the case, and then drop the screws inside the case and then put it back in. As I said, do as I say, not as I do. Anyway, it's keycap time, and for the second time in about a minute, here is another time lapse. I think it looked great, and this bright red braided cable tops it off nicely. After a brief but scary initial test, the keyboard passed. Now onto that sound test. I want to take a minute to tell you what went well, what could be improved, and what I would do next time. First of all, apart from the two problems mentioned earlier, I had no issues. As I said, even the soldering went well. I think that if you're new to soldering, this is a very forgiving first project to start off with, and generally soldering is a very useful skill to have. I think that in the future I will replace the case for an aluminium one of a similar style, and I think the spacebar to be less jarring. If I were to do this again, I would get more tactile switches such as the Zelios variety, and I would buy some genuine cherry stabilizers to improve the feel and sound of the keyboard. If you're thinking of building a keyboard, or you already have done, tell me in the comments, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the section below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, and if you want to see more things like this, click that subscribe button. Thank you for watching.